Good morning and welcome to Existing Buildings for Residential with Jay Richards. This is a new class we're very excited to be able to present to you. We thought that this was topical because so many of the buildings in Ohio are residential and so much of the residential stock is in fact a building that qualifies as an existing building. Jay is an architect administrator with his State of Ohio Board of Building Standards. He is our residential expert. Excuse me, Jay?
Sorry.
He is our residential expert. He had, did all of the code education when we sent him out to construction and design groups as we rolled out the new Residential Code of Ohio in 2019. He is here to talk about this topic briefly, and if you'll notice in the announcements, we are asking that you ask your questions in the Q&A. We may or may not have time to get to the answers, but we will be sending out an email with all the answers from all the Q&As after the programs conclude. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for your attention, and now here's Jay Richards.
Thank you, Meg. Appreciate that. And hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Just for Fun Friday with a bonus. You'll get some CE credits for attending this class today. Congratulations on that. As Meg mentioned, I am Jay Richards. I am a registered architect. I am a staff member for the Board of Building Standards, and my primary responsibility is addressing Residential Code of Ohio questions and helping to develop the code, presenting educational classes like this one. I will say that I do have a tendency to try and pack way too much into everything I do. That is probably the comments I have received about almost everything I do. So I will be moving fairly quickly through this material. Hopefully I can keep everybody's attention and keep us moving. My hope is that we can address some questions at the end if we get through it all. So with that, let's fire it up and head in.
Your presentation is live.
Thank you. So we are here to talk Residential Code of Ohio, Chapter 1, and specifically Section 113, existing buildings. Today on our agenda, I will be reviewing some basics to give everybody kind of a foundation, because I don't know who all's attending the class, what kind of background they have, or the information they may be coming from. Some of this may be repetition for things they've heard already in Code Academy. You may already know, but let's be a little patient. There may be some newbies. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what's the difference, and that'll be explained a little bit more when we get into actual Section 113 provisions. And then I'm going to try and briefly talk about some various illustrations. Won't really have any exercises because this is primarily just a presentation. And the big blue box there is a reminder that we are dealing with the Ohio Residential Code, and specifically the 2019 edition, which everybody should know was adopted last year, effective date July 1, 2019. So let's get into the basics, talking a little bit about owner and building department roles, the numbers, existing structures and rights, progressive compliance, and where are we going to start. So getting into the roles and responsibilities, a key thing that we like to think about and we want to emphasize is that owners really drive this process. It's their development, it's what they want to do, it's their investment. The building department is responding to what the owner wants to do. The building department is really about helping the owner achieve their goals in a way that's safe and sanitary. So they do have common objectives. They want successful development. The owner is looking for that investment to be usable, timely, and cost effective. The building department is wanting to make sure that it's safe, sanitary, and energy conservative. So we have the investment side of it and we have the lawful side of it. Those two things should be complementary. Those two things should work together. Those two things are important for everybody to be successful, both the owners and the people that then live in those buildings, since we're talking residential. So development is an owner's choice. The owner must construct in accordance with 3781, 3791, and the rules of the board. That is statutory law. The owners will initiate the affirmation process for compliance with the law. The building department's responsibility is enforcement of that law. They are responding to that owner's action of initiating that request for affirmation, and they're there, the building department is there to verify that the building or the proposed work is in compliance with the rules of the board, in this case, the residential code or the RCO. A few more basics by the numbers. There was a 2019 survey that went out. Anybody have any idea how many housing units exist in Ohio? I hear all the answers. Everybody knows there's 5,188,270 dwellings in Ohio, or dwelling units in Ohio. Anybody have an idea of how old the dwellings are? What's the median age? If you guess 52 years, structures built in 1968, that means half of the dwelling units that exist in Ohio in 2019 were built prior to 1968. The other half are since 1968. So what is that distribution? Well, since 2000, there's been about 13%. And you can see the rest of the percentages there. Since 2000, and about 3% of that roughly 675,000 has been done in the last decade, so 2010 to up till the survey in 2019. Just a reminder, the very first residential code, statewide residential code, was effective in 2006. So it's within that 13%, within that 675,000, where the residential code has become applicable. Of that, how many of those do we think are single family? What is kind of that distribution? Unfortunately, I don't have a breakdown for just single family, but the survey indicated that 1, 2, and 3 family makes up about 75% of that number, or just under 4 million of those units. And those are the ones that are going to be regulated under the Residential Code of Ohio. The remaining 25% are going to make up either multifamily or manufactured homes. So there's that's kind of an understanding of how many homes are out there that are existing that this section will apply to if the owners choose to do any kind of alteration or addition. So this whole concept that buildings have rights, there's a thing out there, it's called the vested rights doctrine. It shows up in the revised code in 3781.12. There's also an AG opinion issued on that subject, and that's the number. We have it on our website, the Board of Building Standards website, under the AG opinions, and it's BBS number 631 if you want to go out and review it. I've also included that in the educational materials for this course. So if you go out and you scroll down through there, you can find it there as well. The revised code continues to support this whole concept in 3791.04D, where it is a building that is approved and is constructed in accordance with its approval is conclusively presumed to comply with the rules that were in force at the time. The revised code also has 3781.10, which gives the Board of Building Standards the authority to formulate and adopt rules of the board, building codes that will build on the statutory stuff. And those rules are in Ohio Administrative Code, or OAC. And for residential code, that's 4101:8, and it's the Residential Code of Ohio. And Chapter 1 is talking about the administration of that code, and Section 102.7 is the first reference that we have to existing buildings. And that is the place to start when you're dealing with any kind of addition, alteration, repair, change of occupancy to an existing building. Also, Chapter 1 of the both the commercial code and the residential code is all Ohio language, and the board has prepared a commentary for Chapter 1, and there is a specific one for the residential code because there are some slight differences. Yesterday in presentations, we were talking about the Ohio Building Code, and there was Chapter 1 commentary. There's also a residential code commentary, and that too is included in the handouts for today's presentation. And if you want to understand some more about this vested rights doctrine and how these things work together, a lot of that information shows up on page 10 of the residential code, or of the commentary rather. So when we look at Section 102.7, this is how it appears. I want to point out a couple of specific things about the code language. The first is that the occupancy of any structure currently existing on the date of the adoption of this code, that's why July 1, 2019 is important, that's the date, shall be permitted to continue. So it can continue to exist. People can continue to use that building without change, provided there's no orders from residential building official pending, there's no evidence of fraud, and there's no serious safety or sanitation hazards involved with that building. So as of July 1, 2019, all the buildings and structures that existed are allowed to continue to exist. They are going to be treated as existing buildings. This section goes on in the next paragraph sentence to talk about a little bit more specifically about existing buildings, that if the building was constructed in accordance with plans which have been approved prior to the effective date, those are considered existing buildings. This really starts becoming important when you have sort of those buildings that were designed and submitted for approval under the 2013 residential code, which was the previous edition of the residential code. Then the code changed. This says that the owner can continue with the construction of that dwelling as approved under the 2013 residential code and not have to change anything to turn it into an approved building under the 2019. It is okay to bring that forward. It is going to be considered an existing building. The last thing I want to point out about 102.7 is the very first thing in the section, and that is that it identifies and sends you to section 113 and says that 113 shall control the alteration, repair, addition, maintenance, and change of occupancy of any existing structure. Remembering this is the residential code and it applies to residential buildings. So kind of back to that, those ideas of vested rights, the statutes, the administrative code, compliance with section 113. This all works and builds into a concept that we talk about as progressive compliance. When the code gets updated, new requirements may exist. and occur. Existing structure may not be compliant with the new code, but it is still safe and sanitary to occupy. The owners aren't required to update their buildings to meet any of the new provisions. It's all acceptable. You go to 113. 113 is going to describe a scope of work, and that and what part of that scope of work then must be compliant with the requirements for new construction. So it's piece by piece, progressive compliance, that existing housing stock will become more and more compliant with the current code over time. So the first thing, as I go back to, this all starts with the owner. The owner's objective is to add, alter, replace, repair, or move their structure, or perhaps they want to do a change of occupancy in their dwelling. The first thing they must do is go get approval to make those changes, and that approval is about being compliant with the code in force at the time. Building department's response to that is obviously enforcement of the rules of the board, and it's going to be to the extent of the scope of work per section 113. So 113 is going to guide the owner. It's also going to control or limit how much enforcement can happen in terms of requiring an owner to comply with requirements for new construction. And what we'll see, or what we'll find out in 113, is that most of that work also talks about, in some way or form, that any of that work can provide a condition that's no less safe than when that building was originally approved. So where do we start? I think one of the first things I want to talk about a little bit is the authority having jurisdiction. This is going to be focused more towards certified building officials, and it's good information for everybody to have. But when we're dealing with residential construction, a lot of times what we find is that residential building official has the job of residential building official enforcing the rules of the board, but they also have responsibilities for a number of other things in their jurisdiction, and want to make sure that when enforcement is happening, we're going to be addressing enforcement of the rules of the board or enforcement of the Residential Code of Ohio, and want to make sure that, as we say, you're wearing the right hat when you're talking about it. So the revised code talks about who has various enforcement authority in 378103. 378106 talks about the buildings for which the board has authority to write these rules for. And then 3791.04 talks about that the owner's responsibility to get approval first. And one of the things that is unique for the residential code is actually found at 3791.04A1B, which says that if a jurisdiction doesn't have the building department approved by the Board of Building Standards to enforce the Residential Code of Ohio, then the owner is not required to submit or make an application for plan approval. And where that is affected, or the results of that are that without a plan approval, there's no opportunity or anything to inspect to, and without satisfactory inspections, a certificate of occupancy can't be issued. The statutes still say the owner has to comply with the residential code and the provisions there. What this says is that unless a local jurisdiction has a residential building department, there's going to be no enforcement or no government agency looking at that construction to make sure it's in compliance. We go back to, and then revised code gives the board the authority to write rules. The administrative code for the residential code is 4101:8. chapter 1, and then in section 101.2, that's the scope. So the Residential Code of Ohio is going to talk about the scope, and part of the scope is a series of exceptions. And there will be a list of exceptions to 101.2. You want to make sure that the building you're looking at, and we'll talk about some of those in some of the illustrations and a little bit later, might be in that list. And enforcement of the residential code does not apply. They are exempt from enforcement of the residential code. You may also have local ordinances or resolutions within your jurisdiction for which you as a person may have authority to enforce. And so that kind of leads to the next thing about what is that? What do you have the authority to enforce? Well, we're going to specifically be talking about rules of the board and specifically the residential code. But you may also be wearing that hat as a zoning officer or as a floodplain administrator or property maintenance, which is going to be a local ordinance. And you have to make sure of what you're enforcing or what rule is being violated, if there is a violation. So key in anything is understanding some definitions. And for the Residential Code of Ohio, the law says that this is the rules. The board has the authority to write rules for residential buildings. So if we go take a look at that definition of a residential building, there's a couple of things you want to see here. What a residential building is fairly straightforward. It's any 1, 2, or 3 family dwelling house and any accessory structure incidental to that dwelling house. That's what a residential building is. There's a lot of things out there that meet this definition, and we actually don't have the authority to enforce that, and that's brought up in this same definition, and that what we do not have or is not included in enforcement of the residential code are industrialized units, manufactured homes, or mobile homes. And each one is referenced back to a statute, and it talks more specifically about what those types of things are. But those are not considered residential buildings. We'll talk a little bit more about industrialized units and manufactured homes a little bit later. So once again, we get back to, if it is a residential building, 1, 2, or 3 family dwelling, that's not industrialized unit, not a manufactured home, we're regulated under the residential code. Section 102.7 sends us to section 113. So if we start looking at section 113, starts off with a fairly innocuous general paragraph, and it says that this section shall control the alteration, repair, addition, and change of occupancy if that work is involving an existing residential building. In section 113, then there's a whole bunch of other sections that deal with maintenance of existing buildings, additions and alterations, replacements, repairs, changes of occupancy, and moved structures. So what's the difference with all these sections? Why don't we just go and apply, no matter what you do, you go and apply all of the provisions for new construction to that dwelling as you're doing any of these things, and that's it. Well, it kind of goes back to that vested rights doctrine, and that we have limitations as to, or we need to understand what the limitations are as to how far we can require something that was approved when it was built, and it is allowed to continue to exist unchanged unless there is a serious hazard. And this helps us do that. So the first one we're going to look at is the maintenance. That's in section 113.2. And this one deals with residential buildings, and it requires that they shall be maintained in a safe and sanitary condition, and it requires the owner is responsible for that maintenance. It identifies a safe and sanitary condition. Well, what is that? Well, it goes on to say that those conditions were established in the current or any previous plan approvals and the certificate of occupancy. One of the things you'll see is that if you looked at certificate of occupancy sections, it also refers to maintenance in there, that to maintain a valid certificate of occupancy, the owner must maintain their buildings. So that is an agreement that the owner has made with the building department about maintaining their building to maintain their certificate of occupancy so they can continue to occupy it. There's no real strong language in the RCO that allows the building department to go out and deal with maintenance or the lack thereof until the lack of maintenance results in a serious hazard. Then that will trigger the building department to go out. Some local jurisdictions have subsequently adopted property maintenance departments. There's actually a whole model code written on property maintenance. The board has made recommendations to jurisdictions about how to use that, or what addition to use, with certain modifications that go with the rules of the board. But it is enforcement of a local ordinance, and if you are a building official that also heads up property maintenance, you'll have to remember which hat you're wearing. Where do you get your authority to enforce, and what are you enforcing when you go out to that existing structure and want to cite somebody for broken glass or failed siding or whatever the thing is you're doing? You're likely not going to be writing any kind of order or violation out of the Residential Code of Ohio. The other important paragraph here, and it probably affects a minor amount of 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings, but what you will find in this section is that there is a requirement that essentially, if your house has a fire protection system, that if you want to remove or abrogate that fire protection system, you must get approval from the residential building official to do so. And that's where you'll find this requirement. That would be considered a type of alteration. So the next section, 113.4, this is going to be dealing with additions and alterations. So the primary understanding here is that an addition obviously is new square footage. An alteration is going to be a change to the existing structure where it provides something new, either in level of quality, definition of space, added features, characteristics to the home. It is a change, and that's going to be important when we start making distinctions about replacements and repairs, which are the next couple of sections. But in this one, any alterations or additions, they'll conform with the requirements for new construction, and they shall be approved by the residential building official. So if you're doing additions and alterations, you have to make application for approval. All the construction associated with the addition and all the construction associated with the alteration must comply with requirements for new construction. The residential building official has the responsibility to verify that. It also says at the last sentence there that portions of the structure that are not altered and not affected by the alteration are not required to comply with the requirements for new construction. That means if you're changing one area of the house, it doesn't mean that the building department has the right to require you to change the other end of the house to be up to code. So this section's way of saying this is limited to the extent of the alteration. Sandwiched in the middle is that if you are performing additions and alterations, and this is this is saying kind of what that addition and alteration can't do. It can't cause that existing structure to be in violation of any provisions of the code. So it was approved as safe and sanitary. You're coming in and you're making changes to it either through additions or alterations, and you can't do something that's going to make it less safe. You can't do something that is going to change it and make the existing structure have a violation. So that has to be addressed in the proposed changes, that you're not going to promote a violation. So replacement, 113.5. This is where, between 113.5 and 113.6 is where I get most of my questions from insurance claims, as you might gather. But replacements is 113.5, repairs is 113.6. We've tried to make this more clear in the 2019 edition. Basically a replacement, and this is going to deal primarily with existing systems in the building, that replacement itself shall conform with the requirements for new construction, and again, to the extent of the alteration. The existing systems shall not be required to comply with all of the requirements for new construction, except to the extent that they are affected by the alteration. So if you're replacing a furnace, the furnace has to comply with the requirements in its energy efficiency rating and things like that, but you don't have to necessarily replace all of the ductwork that's connected to, even though it might not comply with current requirements, because you're replacing the furnace. That's one of the clearest examples about replacement and limiting the approval and the review to the furnace itself. That would be the extent of the alteration, or what is affected by the alteration. Again, in replacement, it goes on to say that this replacement shall not cause any of those systems to become unsafe, hazardous, overloaded, become less effective than when originally installed, constructed, or approved. A good example here might be that if a water heater is getting replaced with a furnace is getting replaced with a high efficiency furnace, and that old furnace used to be ducted through a chimney and the water heater used to be ducted through the chimney. When you take, you're not going to be able to exhaust that furnace out through that chimney because the flue gases aren't hot enough and it's going to deteriorate the chimney. So you do have to find a different flue location for that high efficiency furnace, because that would make that condition more hazardous than originally approved. 113.6, we're talking about repairs here, and this is going to be specifically geared towards fixing things that are damaged. Replacement is probably going to be more like it met the extent of its life expectancy, and so you're going to replace the system. You're going to replace the covering. You're going to replace the equipment. Repair is it got hurt or something broke, the rest of it is still okay, we're going to try and repair it. So restore it, bring it back to its pre-damaged condition. So the first thing that they talk about, and this is a little bit different than the other ones, they're all additions, alterations, and replacements talk about what they are. Repair starts off with what it's not, or that it does not require that repair meet the provisions for new construction. But it does put a caveat on there that that work that you're doing is done in accordance with the existing approval. So it's not looking at what might be approvable today, it's looking at what was approved in the past, an existing approval. And that repair is done in the same manner and the same arrangement as was in that existing system. So if it's the same manner, same arrangement, you have an existing approval for it, you're just restoring it back to that existing approval. It's kind of like maintenance. And here too, provided it's not less safe than was originally installed and is approved. So you have to take all that into consideration when you're looking at all of these things. A lot of times when homeowners are faced with a repair or a replacement, they may want to make an upgrade. They may want to do some additional work. They're already going to be hiring a contractor. They want to do some more stuff. So oftentimes what happens is these two sections turn into some form of alteration, and 113.4 starts to apply because they are changing something. They're making it, it's not in the same manner. It's not in the same arrangement. It's not the replacement of an existing piece. It's something new. 113.7 is about change of occupancy. This one is going to be a little less common in 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings because for the most part, 1, 2, and 3 family dwellings are one sort of building type, one sort of occupancy. They are regulated by the same code. In a few instances, the requirements for single family may be different than the 2 and 3 family. So in a few instances, there may be a change of occupancy involved if you go from a single family to a 2 or 3 family. Most notably, there is fire separation between the dwelling units that is required. That is an increase. So if you went from a single family and converted it to a 2 or 3 family, you would have to get approvals because there is a change of occupancy and those because of those fire separation conditions. So in a change of occupancy, basically it says you can't change the use or purpose unless it's made to comply with the requirements of this code and it's approved by the building official. Relocations. I want to move my structure. It's an existing building. All I'm doing is taking it from location A and moving it to location B. Why do I need any kind of approval? Well, for one, you're probably not moving the entire structure. Wherever you're going to set it, it needs to still be not less safe. So you need to probably be building a new foundation for it or something like that. So there's going to be some new construction that needs to be approved. But also when you're looking at moved structures, things can happen. Things can shift. Structures can become weaker. Systems can stop functioning. So 113.8 talks about moved structures and what the responsibilities are. So if the structure is moved, well, make sure that it's still safe and sanitary, and any repairs or alterations or change of occupancies will comply with the provisions of this code for new structures. So we're really mostly focused on safe and sanitary. The residential building official in this section is authorized to perform those inspections, and they are there to verify that there's not that the structure has not sustained any damage. They're there to look at the building service equipment, and those systems shall be tested to assure that they are in operating condition. So essentially, after the move, the building official can say, yes, it's safe and sanitary, and the systems that are there are in operating condition. This section also is a reminder that industrialized units, remember we talked about them as being exempt from the residential code, at least for the off-site part, is exempt from the residential code. But once they are set, now they are an existing building, they are no longer considered an industrialized unit, and if an owner wants to make any changes to them, all of those additions, alterations, repairs, replacements, and if they want to move it because it's a modular unit, it must comply with this section 113.8 for moved structures. In some cases, what we've run into is that owners have purchased a modular building and they have brought it in and set it, and either that modular company hasn't gotten the right approvals through the industrialized unit group, or the owner hasn't gotten the right approvals from the local jurisdiction to set that unit. Oftentimes, then, if that is discovered, usually what happens is application of section 113.8 for moved structures applies to that modular unit. The building department needs to make sure that it's safe and sanitary. They need to make sure that all the systems are in operating condition. So we're going to move to some illustrations. I'm going to talk about some things briefly. This was just an example that I had a jurisdiction send me. He was mainly asking about the building right in front there, which we believe happens to be a park trailer that they were putting this addition onto, and wanted to know kind of what regulatory authority he had. It's sort of our opinion that because it is a park trailer, which is not a regulated building, and they are putting an addition to it that is relying on, it's integrated with the park trailer, that addition is actually modifying the park trailer and is outside of the scope of the RCO. But what I found interesting about this picture is they have the house on the left, which is probably a stick-built or a modular home that is regulated by the residential code. They have the park trailer in the middle that isn't. They have what appears to be a third house in the back, which may be a mobile home or a manufactured home, which is outside the rules of the board. And then they have the travel trailer, which actually has a lot of the, meets all the definitions of a dwelling unit and might very well be regulated under the residential code, except it is exempt. It is not a regulated structure because it's on a chassis with running gear and wheels. Its intended purpose is to pull down the road. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about is, I'm a homeowner. I have a second home. It's a cabin. It's my cabin in the woods. It's a cabin on the lake. It's something that we've had a lot of questions about recently. We've developed some new rules for, and the question is that I want to rent it. With all the VRBO stuff and all of that stuff, I want to rent it for the weekend. Or I want to rent it for the week. It was built like a single-family dwelling. It was probably compliant with the Residential Code of Ohio, but But this is one of those cases where we would look at this as potentially a change of occupancy. And in this case, the change of occupancy is going to move the building, particularly if it's held out to the public for rental periods less than 30 days, and that it would be what we call now a transient lodge. And that is regulated under the Ohio Building Code as a group R1. And the owner would have to submit an application to the commercial building department for a change of occupancy on this cabin in the woods or cabin on the lake to be a group R1 transient lodge. And they would have to comply with the requirements in the OBC for that group R1. There are some reliefs in the OBC for this exact situation that says you can use construction criteria for the residential code for that building. So, but it still has a change of occupancy and they must go through that exercise. We did provide in the list of documents a matrix that outlines that transient lodge and all the different provisions, sort of the different types of transient lodges and the requirements, kind of summarizes the Ohio Building Code requirements for transient lodges. The next one I kind of want to talk about is I'm a homeowner, and in these days of COVID, maybe I do, maybe I don't, but my kids are home. I already have some child care responsibilities. Maybe I want to have make a business out of it, either now or in the future. And I noticed that Job and Family Services allows Type A and Type B family daycares that I can operate out of my home. This one is important to understand because this too, in some sense, is a change of occupancy. And it's going to be an interesting one because, yes, to do a Type A or Type B, Type A's for sure, and some Type B's, you need to get a license from Job and Family Services. Part of their requirement is that you have an inspection of your home by a building department, and the building department has a responsibility, and this shows up in 113.7.2 and 113.7.3, to go out and inspect a home, fill out that inspection form, give it to the homeowner. The homeowner submits that with their application to Job and Family Services. And if Job and Family Services provides them a license for Type A family daycare or Type B family daycare for that matter, guess what happens? That home is now exempt from the rules of the board. So now it is strictly a Type A family daycare center, and building departments don't have authority to enforce building codes on that structure. So the next one is I'm living in an old farmhouse and I want to renovate it. I'm on a farm. I'm ag exempt, right? Nope, not with the farmhouse. Any work on a farmhouse. Farmhouses are not ag exempt. There's actually an AG opinion that was written on it. It's AG opinion 3440. We have it on the Board of Building Standards website as BBS number 600. I've also included it in the handouts for today. The farmhouse itself, while other buildings on the farm may be ag exempt, the farmhouse is not. Manufactured house, modular structure. Is there a difference? Yes, there is a difference. Manufactured house is going to be built in accordance with federal regulations from Housing and Urban Development. The enforcement of setting and resetting manufactured houses comes through the Manufactured Homes Program, housed in the Division of Industrial Compliance. It is exempt from the rules of the board. There is no enforcement from a certified building department. A modular structure. The difference there is going to be manufactured house, Housing and Urban Development. Modular structure is probably going to be an IU because it's probably built off-site, closed construction, transported to the site and erected on site-built foundation and things like that. Modular structures, local building departments have some responsibilities for all of the site-built stuff, the foundations, some of the closures. Sometimes the modular units, the industrialized units, have requirements of additional pieces that are built on or added to that structure. The homeowner buys an industrialized unit or a modular structure. That manufacturer of the modular structure has a requirement to get approval from the IU program here at the Board of Building Standards. The owner has a responsibility to get approval from the local jurisdiction, the local building department, for all that on-site stuff. And then, of course, if they're going to move that modular structure, it becomes a moved structure from as an existing building. There is also a BBS and Division of Industrial Compliance joint advisory regarding manufactured housing and enforcement of that stuff, who has what enforcement authorities. And you can find that in the list of handouts. It's also on the board's website. So, been sent home, or I am wanting to start up a new venture. I want to convert a portion of my house or my home to a business. I can just do that, right? Well, you can't just do it. There's a good chance that if it's just an office or and it's just you, that it will continue to be your dwelling and regulated under the RCO. But because you're talking about conducting commerce, or because it's becoming a business, it's possible that it could be a change of occupancy. And what you want to make sure is that you go over to the Ohio Building Code, because that's what's going to regulate non-residential occupancies or uses. And in there, in section 419, they talk about live work units. So if you take a dwelling unit and you put some kind of commercial operation in it, live work may apply, and it would become a change of occupancy. Within that section 419 live work, there are some criteria that if you fall under, you stay just simply a dwelling unit, there's no change of occupancy, and because it is a single family dwelling or under the Residential Code of Ohio, it would remain under the Residential Code of Ohio. So that's one that you would have to investigate a little bit more closely. Also, when you're looking at existing buildings, there's several other conditions that may play a factor. One, we've talked about moved structures quite a bit, and I bring it up here because it goes back to if you're dealing with an industrialized unit that the manufacturer didn't get approvals, you may be dealing with something like that as a moved structure. Historic buildings. Believe it or not, we do have historic houses. They do have some provisions in the residential code for historic buildings. They get some relief to deal with the historic nature of the structure. If your house does exist in a floodplain, and it's something you'll want to check, that you want to check with the floodplain administrator for the jurisdiction, whether it's in the floodplain or not. If it is in the floodplain, there are some requirements that you would have to comply with if you're doing certain types of work, alterations, additions to that existing building in the floodplain. Accessibility. While accessibility is not required under the Residential Code of Ohio, there's a lot of people that want their homes to be their forever homes. They're thinking about aging in place. They want to add accessible features to their home. There is a section in Chapter 3, and it's 320, I believe, that is about accessibility. And to the extent, here's might be one of those where they're either making an alteration, possibly a replacement, but probably an alteration. To the extent of the alteration, it has to comply with 320. So kind of perhaps a silly example, but I want to put grab bars in my bathroom for my bathtub or my shower, but my bathroom door is 24 inches wide. You can put those grab bars in that bathtub or the shower without having to make the accessible path, without having to widen that door. So to the extent of the alteration. And then the last one I have is about serious hazard. I mentioned it briefly with maintenance. A serious hazard is the primary condition that would happen in a home where the building official has some authority to enforce the Residential Code of Ohio without the owner initiating and coming saying, hey, I want to do this. So I would say with that, I have made it through my slides. I want to thank you for joining me today and hearing what I have to say. Hopefully, I've addressed a lot of things. Hopefully, you found some nuggets to take home with you to use. If you have any questions, leave them in the chat box. I don't know if I'll be able to address any or not. Meg, do we have any that I can take a minute to do?
Shay, we have 20.
20?
We have 20. I think
Okay.
it might be better to answer these in email so that they're answered consistently and fully for all participants.
That would be fantastic.
All right.
I'll put it on my list of things to do and we will get it out.
Thank you all for your time and attention. We appreciate you being here. Thank you, Jay, for an excellent presentation. And woohoo, you made it.
Yeah, I did. I got through them all.
Our next class will be at 10:45. That is an overview of energy conservation with Debbie Oler. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at 10:45. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.